MOOCs for professional development. MOOC, well, you know, is a massively online open course. They're free unless you want to receive a credential. Credentials generally cost about $40 to $50 or so, and then you get a certificate, which you can put on your LinkedIn profile.
I'll go.
Go and strangle her, please. And okay, our graduate student. Okay. And I'll have to edit that out of the recording this. So you can attend MOOCs for free, and a lot of MOOCs are created, or the materials in MOOCs are created under a Creative Commons license. So some of that material you can just take and use. We now have SUNY MOOCs for the last 3 years, and SUNY has been providing grants under the IITG grant program, the Innovative Instructional Technology Grant Program, for many schools developing them. And they're generally in the tens of thousands of dollars. And some of them produced by Duke and Harvard and other places cost $1 million or so for production, because they bring in teams of instructional designers, videographers, script writers, and so forth. And they do some really high quality production. And because many of the materials are released into that, you can always grab them and post them in your classes and use them. So there's some nice resources being created. Even if you don't attend and participate in the MOOC, you can often grab the resources from them. So the main reason why people like MOOCs is they're free, and many of them have been funded in part by the Gates Foundation and others, because it provides educational resources to people who can't afford college and so forth. And in less developed countries, that's really useful, but it's kind of nice for us as well. Most of them involve, I say usually, because I've had MOOCs where someone's sitting there speaking from PowerPoints into a microphone. So someone else tried logging in on this account from somewhere. I have no idea where or how, but it has to have my login credentials to do that, which is really strange because it is in that room there. But okay, in any case, usually this stuff is produced really well. And they often rely on high quality instructional design, where they're using best practices in developing the materials, which is kind of useful to see as well as perhaps to experience.
I know, and oftentimes it's like, you can't be the person who's just watching and not participating. It's set up so you have to do stuff.
Yeah, you have to do things. They're very active, and they're set up so that there's typically a lot of peer interaction. One of the MOOCs that I was kind of apprehensive about that I took was when I'm playing guitar. Now, I've played guitar since I was 12, but a friend of mine wanted to do it, and I said, well, let me try it because I'm kind of curious. So we did it together. And what happened was, it was a 6-week MOOC taught by someone at the Berkeley School, which is a pretty good school, and music. And it went from, in the first week, they were talking about the parts of guitar, how to tune it, how to use a pick, and various accessories, to by the 6th week, people were doing some blues improvisation and recording 2 tracks and posting that to share with other people. So they had you play a rhythm guitar and then do a blues progression lead over that within a 6-week period. And I was amazed at how well it worked. Now, many of the people in it were musicians who were just kind of curious about this themselves. But what I liked about it was one of the first times I saw peer evaluation, where people would post recordings of what they were doing in SoundCloud, and then it used a peer process where it randomly assigned you to at least 3 other people, where you graded their work using a very well-defined rubric, and then you got feedback from them. And you could do more than that, because some people dropped that along the way, and you kept saying, you know, we really appreciate it if you review more. But it was kind of interesting because you got to see how others were doing, and you got feedback from people, and the feedback was often really good. So
I did that with an app design class, and it was the same thing. Like, you would try out the person's app and give feedback. And I was surprised.
And one of the MOOCs, the first time I saw this was Dan Ariely's behavioral economics MOOC out of Duke, and they did this. And one other thing that they did that was really impressive was they had weekly office hours where they had people using the Q&A option back in Google Hangouts when that was available, where people would post questions all week, they vote them up or down, and then Dan Ariely and some of his grad students, and sometimes guests he invited from other places, would do a Google Hangout answering these questions and then taking some questions from the audience where people would type them, other people would vote them up or down, and they'd have thousands of people, sometimes up to 5,000 or 6,000 people, watching these on YouTube and posting questions and so forth. It was interesting. So I've gotten some good ideas from this, and certainly watching the videos, it's been kind of impressive to see what you can do when you've got lots of resources. But it still gives me some ideas on what I'd like to try anyway. They often model evidence-based teaching methods that are scalable, and that's been really useful for me since I teach up to 420 students at a time. I'm not teaching tens of thousands, but there's, in practice, there may not be that much of a difference between 400 students and thousands of students, because you want things where you're still doing something that's effective, but that works at a larger scale.
I think it's also nice because a lot of those evaluation things are set up in a way that's not that unlike the workplace, so it models that for students as well. And then it's also a more, like, it should be familiar to you, like, whatever the method is.
So the major providers, Coursera is a big one, edX is another big one. Udacity is not free, but it's fairly inexpensive. They're usually $10 or $20 per course. Canvas has lots of free MOOCs, not quite as many as Coursera and edX. There's iVersity, which is, I think, the European one. Open Learning is the European group, I believe. I think it's part of Open University. I'm not positive on that. I should have checked. There's NovoEd, which is a for-profit version from Stanford, where you do have to pay, but it's fairly inexpensive. And there's Udemy, where they have very short courses, which, again, are not terribly expensive. There's also Open to Study, and that bottom thing should be dropping down, but it's not. I'm not quite sure why. Okay, so here's a few that I recommend, that I've taken. One is the Learning How to Learn MOOC by Barbara Oakley. This is the most popular MOOC ever. She runs it every month. She's actually going to be a keynote speaker at the CIT conference in June in Oneonta. And she does an amazing job with this video in helping students learn how to engage in effective learning practices. So it focuses on space practice, lead practice, repeated testing. But she's got some really clever videos she's put together, and she used some really innovative techniques to illustrate it. She uses great examples and metaphors, and it's team taught with another person whose name I forget, because she's more memorable. He's a neuroscientist who actually talks about how the brain works and how the synaptic connections are formed and so forth, and why these things work. But it's an incredibly popular course, and Dave Parisian in the education department has used this as part of his courses. Or in his
it's an education.
It's an educational, yeah. Educational technology. I forgot the title of it, but basically it's a beginning computer science class for education, I believe, where he focuses quite a bit on students learning to learn. It's for people who become teachers. So having them learn this is quite useful. There is a powerful tools for teaching and learning, which is an overview of Web2O tools. They provide a long list of tools, and every week they give you some categories. You have to go and explore something and write something up on that, and then other people provide feedback on that, and comment on it, and so forth. So it's mostly discussion, but there are some tests in it as well. There's one on digital storytelling, which is fairly popular. In Canvas, some of the most popular ones are, they have a prefix of HE for the higher education. Designing and Teaching for Impact in Online Courses is one that a number of people have taken, and I haven't taken that one, but Liz Dunn-Smith took it, and a number of other people reported really good feedback on it. There's the SUNY Accessibility MOOC, which was put together by a group in SUNY. And there's, more broadly, a list of Canvas MOOCs for educators, and that's continually updated. Some of the edX MOOCs, I'm not sure if this one's being offered right now. It's come in and out a couple of times. Evidence-based undergraduate STEM teaching was done by, the main organizer of it was at Vanderbilt, who wrote the major book on using clickers. It was in elaboration on Eric Mazur's earlier work. Dirk Gruff actually is one of the major people in here, and the follow-up course on advancing learning through evidence-based STEM teaching. It's a very well done MOOC with lots of good videos. There was some overlap where they didn't edit the videos too well. I took it in the first pass. I'm assuming it's probably cleaned up a little bit. One minor complaint I have about it is they have a big discussion of the advantage of low-stakes testing, and then the testing strategy they actually used was to give you 2 attempts at any test every week, and in the second attempt, your highest possible grade is a 65. So it'll be the higher of the 2. So if you get less than a 65, you have an incentive to take it a second time. But if you get lower than a 60, if you get above a 65, there's no advantage in doing it. That never happened to me, but I thought it was kind of odd that in a MOOC that was talking about the benefits of low-stakes testing, they didn't actually do it. So a couple of things I'd recommend that you look at is, one is the Class Central MOOC search. You sign up for an account there and list some interest, and they'll put together a list of MOOCs for you, and they'll send you updates every month or 2 of MOOCs that you might be interested in. There's also a MOOC list on teacher education where you can get a list of all the MOOCs or MOOCs that are useful. Just a question of whether to pay for a certificate. This is a little bit of economics here. Some costs are costs that once you paid, you can't get back. And so in theory, what economists argue is that when you're rational, the sunk cost should not affect your decision, because once you pay them, it's gone whether you decide to stay in the course or not. You have to pay these generally in the first few weeks of the course. And in principle, it shouldn't matter whether you paid $40 for the course or not, because either way, you've lost that $40. You either get the certificate, or you either pass it and get the certificate, or you don't. But we're not really rational. So in general, if it's a MOOC that I really want to complete, I normally will pay for it, not so much because I need the credential, but just because once I pay that, there's this thing, I paid for this, I want to get the certificate.
I never paid for it.
But do you complete them?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a couple MOOCs I signed up just for the resource. Rebecca's perhaps a little more diligent with these things than me, but one time I signed up for 3 MOOCs at once, and I paid for 2 of them, and I completed those. And the other I looked at, got some interesting information, but I just didn't do all the testing.
I've completed any of them that I absolutely wanted to, and then there's some that I've certainly signed up and just kind of.
So, and that's the nice thing about MOOCs. They're free. You can go in, find anything you need, and then leave, or just jump in and out, grab resources you like, get references.
So if you really want to really do the MOOC, it does take time, because it's like taking a regular class, right? It's not passive. So I do them often during breaks, like during the summer or whatever, so that I have more time to focus on them. John's not like that, though.
I mostly do them during the academic year because I have more time during the academic year, because in the summers I'm teaching 7 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and 3 hours on Saturday. So I don't have as much time then, but if you want the list, you can send it to you, or you can just grab that code. But questions, comments, thoughts?
So you're saying with Harvard and whatnot, spend all this money in systems to develop MOOCs. Does the studio have any resources, even just like a studio where you can go do that for?
Yes and no. We don't really have a studio, but we have a multimedia room upstairs in the library. And we do have instructional designers. If you apply for one of the IITG grants, there is normally funds set aside to work with an instructional designer and videographer. And we have at least one MOOC, maybe 2 or 3 of them, that Isabel did, and the Isabel Bishindrich did.
Yeah, so I asked, one of them was in statistics.
Right. So yeah, on biometrics, I think.
Yeah, well, I think it's biostatistics.
Biostatistics, yeah. So, but I think she was developing 2 others. If she wasn't, someone else was going to. I'm not sure how that came about or what ended up with that, but they were building a sequence. So if you get a grant for it, you can do that. Coursera has been moving in the last year more towards developing sequences of MOOCs rather than individual ones. So that makes it a little bit tougher unless you want to put together a package with other people, put together a group. It's probably harder getting a new MOOC approved, at least through Coursera. But if you do, there is some funding and we do have some facilities here.
So they're starting to move towards sequence courses. So there's like the availability for upper level content through these like sequences.
The stuff that I did was pretty advanced.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they do have, yeah, a lot of the MOOCs are offered.
And I really had to like work hard to like.
So you can do that?
Yeah. It wasn't a cakewalk.
Yeah.
The behavioral economics class probably had more work than any class I've ever taken in graduate school or undergraduate. Now, partly because I found it fascinating, but every week there was a set of 14 or 16 readings that were journal articles, and then there was another 15 or 20 supplemental readings that you could look at. And he'd have probably 7 or 8 15-minute videos that you had to watch, but then he'd bring in experts who give these 20 or 30-minute talks on topics that were just fascinating. So I was spending probably 15 to 20 hours.
I single-handedly built apps like weekly. Like without.
And you can get MOOCs on app program on building iPhone or Android apps. There are MOOCs on game theory. There's MOOCs on any computer language out there pretty much.
Programming is probably what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to find the one that's like a good fit for you because not all of them will be. So.
Yeah.
And you can always sign up, look at it, see what it's like, and then
go away.
leave if you don't like it. Personally, I find paying for it makes it more likely that I'll actually finish, even though I know it's irrational, and I explain to students why it's irrational.
I use like, I think most of the ones that I've done on Coursera, but I have done some on others. And I basically like whenever I've gone into one of the systems, then like there's a way to like say like what you're interested in, so it can like make recommendations to you, and it does send me like, hey, starting this month, like these are things that you might be interested in, and that's often how I discover stuff. So.
Now, Coursera isn't doing away with the single topic MOOCs, but they're building more sequences, and that's where they're putting most of their funds for development. And some of them are being used with micro-credentials to generate them. Some of them are bundled together to get credit. There's been a big push for MOOCs for credit. Georgia Tech is doing it, the University of Georgia. There's some talk in SUNY of using MOOCs for credit, combined with college courses and so forth. But they can be really nice resources. One of the most interesting applications was done at San Jose State back with a circuits and electronics course. The regular course had a failure rate of about 55%, 60%, and they change it to use a MOOC resource. And when they, hi Kaylee, we're just finishing up the one on MOOCs. We'll be happy to share. If you send me an email, we'll share the slides with you. One of the things that, so what they did was they flipped the classroom and they used the edX MOOC on circuits and electronics. The students all signed up for the MOOC. They took the MOOC, and then the classroom time was devoted entirely with the instructor and grad students to working on problems on that. The types that used to be homework assignments and so forth, they were all in the classroom. So they flipped it, and they ended up with a passing rate of somewhere close to 90%. So it went from 50% to, I think it was 88 or 90% finally. So there was a huge gain in student performance as a result of that. Now they discontinued that because they had a protest from faculty about using MOOCs, mostly people in philosophy and humanities actually. They weren't really happy with this shift away from small class discussions as a resource, but it can be really effective, and at least the resources can.
I think it depends what you're trying to learn too. Like sometimes, like we do have like the lynda.com stuff too, which is really great as like a way to learn. But sometimes like you need a little more guidance if it's something new. So like what's nice about the MOOC is there's some sort of interaction, and a lot of the ones that are like on programming and stuff like that have help boards and things like that too. So so there's usually grad students or something like in there to help troubleshoot technical issues and things like
I
that.
always go to Mark to get that stuff
Yeah.
as well.
If they're doing or trying to have these MOOCs that count for credit, is there any sort of like accreditation or anybody that's judging these whether the material is efficient or thorough enough?
Well, I mean, the same could be said for each of our classes.
That's true, but the thing
But
is,
actually, MOOCs do go through a bit more review. MOOCs do have teams of designers working with them and building them. But many of the proposals for using for credit will involve having a class component tied to it. So they're using the MOOC resources, but they're actually doing the work in the class. But they are talking about doing it basically like very large online classes, where some of the programs that are doing the MOOCs for credit are requiring that people go to a testing center to take the exams and so forth for verification. Now, Coursera has used a variety of authentication systems. They've moved away from a lot of them because they found it didn't make that much of a difference. But what they were doing for a while, or at least for the MOOCs where you pay for the certificate, is they required that your picture be taken, and then it did every time at the beginning and end of an assessment, and it compared that with the digitized file they had stored when you first did it. Another device that they also used originally was you had to type out a sentence where the sentence was something that I agreed to abide by Coursera's honor code and so forth. And that actually grew out of some research that Dan Ariely had done, which was in the behavioral economic movement. Just having students agree to that reduced cheating down to close to zero if it was done before a test.
Weren't the studies actually show like whether or not there's actually an honor code? Just
and it was done actually, the study was done at 4 institutions, 2 of which had an honor code, 2 of which didn't. The presence or absence of the honor code had no effect, but having students sign their names that they agreed to abide by the honor code eliminated cheating effectively.
I used to do that in every exam. There's a statement at the top that they would sign, but I stopped doing that more recently.
But it worked, or the research suggested that it does work. And this was with a game setup or a series of problems they did in experimental design. But it was remarkably effective, so they built that into Coursera. And I think they still use that. They also measured your typing patterns when they were looking at the rate at which you typed it and the pauses between characters and so forth. And they were doing matching between the pattern of typing you had and the stored pattern when you first created that. So they do a little bit of verification. They were doing a little bit. Now it's mostly just agreeing to the terms of the verification, at least for Coursera. I've taken mostly Coursera MOOCs recently. Okay, so actually, Kaylee, if you want to grab the resources or grab these slides, just click on that little, or type in that. Oh, she can't do it.
you just can't click on it.
Well, you can't click on it, but you can either type in this short Google URL or take a picture of this and with Snapchat or a QR scanner, and it should take you right to the resources.